Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 246 to 247. Qur'aniyu lesson by thinker of the Qur'an, Allama Ahmad Parwez. My dear ones, today is the 22nd of June, 1969, and we have reached verse 245 of Surah Al-Baqarah in the new series of Quranic lessons. Today, the discourse will begin from verse 246 of Al-Baqarah, 246. The practical life condition and struggle of those who attain paradise. In the sequence of the previous verses, the matter began with أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. 246. Do you think that merely by saying La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah you will enter paradise? Whereas you have not yet passed through those difficult valleys where before you the prophets and their followers experienced such conditions that when surrounded by afflictions and hardships, the very ground beneath their feet seemed to vanish. They were engulfed in earthquake-like calamities, so intense that spontaneously it came upon their tongues, O Allah, when will that help come which has been promised to us? Out of the intensity of longing, this turned into a prayer upon their lips, and from the other side came the voice, Be assured, because of your steadfastness and patience, that help is about to arrive. This was one group, the group of those who enter paradise.
The one who dies is he who does not believe in the life of the world to come. In contrast to the earlier group, another community is mentioned. أَلَنْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَذَرَ الْمَوْتِ. Have you not considered the state of that nation, that group, that community, who were in thousands, but when a slight danger appeared before them, their condition became such that like sheep and goats, they fled from their homes. They fled out of fear of death. This was difficult to understand, as I had said in the previous lesson. Death is like a shadow. If you run away from it in fear, it follows behind you, but if you chase it, it runs ahead of you. Their condition was such that out of fear of death, they fled from the battlefield, even from their homes. فَقَالَ لَهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُوا. It was said to them, You flee from death out of fear? Then behold, death has clung to you. The one who truly lives is he who looks death in the eye and mocks it. Adam bimirat asbe yaqini. Man dies from lack of certainty. Then when they stood firm in the field, thum ahyahum, then they were granted a new life. The societal end of the affluent class according to the law of retribution. The style of the Holy Quran is that it presents a principle, and then, as proof of its truth, it brings forth testimony from history. Here, the principle was presented, and in its testimony it was said, Alam tara ila al-mala'i min bani Isra'ila min ba'di Musa, 246. After Moses, peace be upon him, the condition of the children of Israel had become such. And this condition was not of the common people, but rather, ila al-mala'i min bani Isra'ila. It was the condition of the chiefs of the nation. If we go deeper, it was not merely the chiefs, but the Quran has pointed to something profound. It was the muftarifin, those who lived luxuriously on the earnings of others. Their condition had deteriorated to this extent. Ease and comfort on one side, and the life of struggle and jihad on the other, are two contradictory things that cannot coexist. That is why the Quran used the word al-mala'i here, directing attention to the fact that this was not a group of fighters or strivers, but rather a group of the affluent class. Their condition was exactly as described further. إِذْ قَالُوا لِنَبِيٍّ لَهُمُ ابْعَثْ لَنَا مَلِكًا نُقَاتِلْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, 246. They said to their prophet, Appoint for us a king so that we may fight in the way of Allah. The common translation here is that they asked for a king to be appointed over them, but this was not merely about appointing a king. It was made clear that they claimed they wanted to go to war, For an army going into battle, a king is not required. What is needed is a commander. The meaning of Malik here is one who possesses power and authority. In governance, the one in authority may be a secretary or a minister. In the army, the one in authority is the commander. Therefore, what they had actually said was, we will go, we will fight in the battlefield, appoint for us a commander. قَالَ هَلْ عَسَيْتُمْ إِن كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ أَلَّا تُقَاتِلُوا 246. It was said, we know the nature of your mentality. It appears that right now you are eagerly saying you will go to war and want a commander appointed for you. But it seems that when fighting is made obligatory upon you, then you will turn your backs and flee from the battlefield. At first, you will not go at all, and if compelled to go, your condition will be such that you will retreat. My dear ones, as I have mentioned in 2 or 3 previous sermons, the reality is, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضٍ 285. Your condition becomes such that you believe in one part of the divine law, but reject another part.
Quran has made jihad obligatory upon the entire ummah, just like fasting. Its nature is such that in the Quran, in exactly the same words it is said, Kutiba alaykumul qital 2.216. Fighting has been prescribed for you, made obligatory upon you. This applies to the entire community. And in the same words, Kutiba alaykumus siyam 2.183. Fasting has been prescribed for you. Now, the condition of this nation is that when it comes to fasting, the strictness of the command is such that it is observed with utmost discipline. But for Kutiba alaykumul qital 2.16, they have set aside a separate army, saying this is not for us. أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضٍ 2.85. You believe in one part of the book and reject another part. فما جزاء من يفعل ذلك منكم إلا خزي في الحياة الدنيا 2.85. Remember, whoever adopts such a course, his outcome will be nothing but disgrace in this worldly life. ويوم القيامة يردون إلى أشد العذاب 2.85. And on the day of resurrection, they will be returned to the most severe punishment. The one whose life here is a life of humiliation, can he expect a life of honor in the hereafter? It was said, we know your condition. At this moment you demand it, but when it is made obligatory, then you will turn your backs and flee. قالوا وما لنا ألا نقاتل في سبيل الله. They said, what has happened to us that we should not fight in the way of Allah? I had explained that what the Quran means by fighting fi sabilillah, in the way of Allah, is this, to twist the wrist of the oppressor, to help the oppressed. Wherever the sword is raised for this purpose, it is considered fi sabilillah. Here, the Quran clarified their statement, وَمَا لَنَا أَلَّا نُقَاتِلَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَقَدْ أُخْرِجْنَا مِنْ دِيَارِنَا وَأَبْنَائِنَا 2.46. And what reason do we have that we should not fight in the way of Allah when we have been driven out of our homes and separated from our children? Do you not see how the path of Allah appears here? They had become oppressed, subjugated to tyranny, expelled from their homes, and separated from their families.
Quran calls those who flee the battlefield zalimeen. The Quran has declared that those who turn their backs and flee from the battlefield are among the zalimeen. The struggle of the oppressed, whether fought by themselves or by others who rise to defend them, is fi sabilillah. But when force is used to crush the oppressed further and weaken them, that is fi sabil at-taghut. They said, what has happened to us? Are we so degraded that even in such circumstances we will not fight in the way of Allah? فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالُ تَوَلَّوْا إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْهُمْ 2:24-6. But when fighting was prescribed for them, when war was declared, when they were commanded to stand in the battlefield, then what happened was exactly what their prophet had feared. They turned their backs and fled, except for a few among them. وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِالظَّالِمِينَ 2:24-6. And Allah is all-knowing of the wrongdoers. The word zulm in the Quran means that something is not in its rightful place. The rightful place of a soldier is in the battlefield, standing firm. When he abandons that place and flees, he commits zulm. Musafi zindagi mein sirati fawlad paida kar. In the battlefield of life, develop the character of steel.
Quran uses lakum instead of alakum when addressing the commander of the army. The Quran directs the commander to stand firm against the enemy. The only exception mentioned is in Surah At-Tawbah, where turning aside from the battlefield is allowed either to change formation or to join one's own group. Beyond this, fleeing from the enemy and showing one's back is called zulm. This is because zulm means that something is not in its rightful place. A soldier's rightful place is in the battlefield, standing firm. If he abandons that place, he becomes a zalim. Similarly, in civil administration, if a judge or ruler does not remain at his seat of justice, that too is zulm. Wherever a thing fails to remain in its proper position, that is injustice. Wallahu alimum bizalimin. Allah is all-knowing of the wrongdoers. Thus, the Quran makes it clear, when a soldier flees from the battlefield, leaving the place where he was meant to stand, it is zulm. This was the final point made, and then the discourse moved back to the middle of the narrative.
They had asked for a commander to be appointed for them. وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ بَعَثَ لَكُمْ طَالُوتَ مَلِكًا. Their prophet said, according to the divine law, Talut has been appointed as your commander. It was they themselves who had asked for a commander. Notice who they were. Al-Mala'u min Bani Israel, the chiefs of the children of Israel. قَالُوا أَنَّا يَكُونُ لَهُ الْمُلْكُ عَلَيْنَا. They said, how can he have authority over us? The Quran's expression here is remarkable. إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ بَعَثَ لَكُمْ طَالُوتَ مَلِكًا. Arabic scholars know the significance of the letter lam in lakum. Normally, when someone is appointed over others, the word alaykum is used, meaning upon you. But here, the Quran uses lakum, which indicates that Talut was appointed for their benefit, not to rule over them. A commander is always appointed for the advantage of the army, not to exercise dominion over it. Yet their mindset did not grasp this point. They responded, قَالُوا أَنَّا يَكُونُ لَهُ الْمُلْكُ عَلَيْنَا. Their mentality remained unchanged. They thought that whoever is appointed as commander comes as a ruler. They said alayna, appointed over us. The Quran's distinction between lakum and alayna created a profound difference here. Their objection was, how could he be appointed as commander? What deficiency is there in us? وَنَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِالْمُلْكِ مِنْهِ. They said, we are more entitled to authority than him. They considered themselves more deserving of power, of position, of high rank. The question then arises, what was their criterion for this entitlement? The Quran reveals it. وَلَمْ يُؤْتَ سَعَةً مِنَ الْمَالِ. Their objection was that Talut was a poor man, not wealthy, not the son of a rich man. This shows the mentality of al-Mala'i min Bani Israel. Their standard of leadership was wealth. This mentality is not new. It has existed from the beginning. बदल के भेस ज़माने में फिर से आते हैं. अगरचे पीर है आदम, जवान है लात व मनात. The story of Adam and Iblis in the Quran is a symbol of human psychology. This is not a matter of today alone that wealth is considered the source of honor, prestige, position, and authority. This unfortunate standard has existed from the very beginning. The emergence of Adam and Iblis was on the same day, and with it, this mentality also appeared. They said, Talut is not wealthy, not the son of a great landowner, not rich. The same criterion was applied. It was not only for appointing ministers, but even for appointing a commander of the army, they insisted he must be wealthy. One single standard was set, possession of wealth. You can see how deeply rooted this mentality was. The chiefs of the children of Israel, إِلَى الْمَلَإِ مِنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, 246, had this very characteristic. They wanted that even the organization of the army should remain in the hands of their own class, the affluent class. Their objection was, how can he be appointed commander? He is not wealthy. From the very first day, since the story of Adam and Iblis began, human psychology has set this standard. Whoever surpasses others in wealth is considered entitled to every high position and authority.
Inherited wealth leads human life toward ruin. Inherited wealth is something that comes without effort, written into one's share from birth. This is where nations begin to collapse. The standard was set that leadership must be based on sa'atan min al-mal, abundance of wealth. No other qualification,
No other characteristic was considered necessary. ते गल ते सीधी जेही है ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਕਹੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਿਲ ਹੈ ਫਿਰ ਕਹੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੀ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ 'ਚ ਮਿਆਰ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹਦੀ ਕੋਠੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਣੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਮਲੇ ਵੀ ਸਿਆਣੇ. The meaning is clear. In our language it is still said today that the one who has wealth in his mansion, even his fools are considered wise. The son of a rich man cannot be called a fool. This is the standard. Sa'atan min al-mal. How much wealth does he possess? The outcome of such nations which adopt this measure is evident in history, destruction and downfall. Divine standard of leadership based on basta. In contrast to human standards, observe the divine criterion. قَالَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ اسْتَفَاهُ عَلَيْكُمْ. Allah has chosen him over you. His selection was not based on wealth, but on other qualities. The standard was, وَزَادَهُ بَسْطَةً فِي الْعِلْمِ وَالْجِسْمِ. He was appointed commander because he surpassed them both in knowledge and in physique. For a military leader, two qualities are essential: physical strength and intellectual capacity. He was strong in body, healthy, energetic, and robust, and at the same time superior in knowledge. This is the true standard, a sound mind and a sound body. The Arabic word bastatan signifies abundance given, not merely for personal possession, but for the benefit of others. Arabs use this word when someone's strength or quality extends beyond himself and serves others. Thus, Talut was granted bastatan in knowledge and body, qualities that would benefit the entire community. This is the true standard. It was said that he is endowed with strength and knowledge. It is possible that sincere individuals may possess knowledge and energy, but sometimes these qualities serve only themselves, their families, their groups, or their clans. The Quranic concept of bastatan goes beyond this. Bastatan means that the qualities given are not confined to the individual alone, but extend outward for the benefit of humanity. The abundance of knowledge and strength must be such that it benefits others, not just one's own circle. This is why the Quran describes those who spend from what they have been given. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. Whatever is granted to them, they keep it open for the benefit of others. Thus, bastatan encapsulates not only abundance in knowledge and physique, but also the quality of sharing, of extending those gifts beyond oneself to serve the wider community and humanity. The meaning of man yasha'u in Quranic usage. The verse says, Wallahu yu'ti mulkahu man yasha'u, 2:47. This phrase has often been translated in our tradition as, Allah gives his authority to whomever he wills. For centuries, the rendering of man yasha'u has been understood in a way that suggests arbitrary divine choice. Whomever Allah wants, he guides. Whomever he wants, he misguides. Whomever he wants, he makes rich. Whomever he wants, he makes poor. Whomever he wants, he punishes. Whomever he wants, he forgives. Whomever he wants, he sends to hell. Whomever he wants, he sends to paradise. This interpretation of will has created immense confusion, as if there were no principle, no law, no standard, no qualification to be considered. The impression becomes that Allah acts without rule or measure, bestowing or withholding purely at whim. Atte ki parwa e rakib, atte beparwaya parle, amla waleanu chhadde o guneharnu. The idea is that he is sovereign, absolute, and independent, Allah as-Samadu, translated as the one beyond need. But the Quran's intent is not to portray Allah as arbitrary. Rather, his will operates through his attributes, and his desire is that those attributes manifest within his servants. Thus, man yasha'u refers to those who align themselves with his standards and laws. The best among people are those in whom the divine qualities, justice, wisdom, strength, compassion are cultivated. It is to such individuals that Allah grants authority, guidance, and honor. List the qualities in a ruler that you attribute to Allah, and then consider, would you not rise against him with shoes in hand if he claimed those qualities while ruling without law, without principle, without standard, without selection? He does whatever he pleases, appoints whomever he pleases, removes whomever he pleases. You call this corruption, plunder, tyranny. But if he says, these are the reflections of God's attributes within me, then what will you say?
Did you not yourselves declare, As-Sultan zillallahi al-ard? The king is the shadow of God on earth? If you portray God as one who is bound by no law, no principle, then his shadow must be of the same kind as you see before you. The matter was not that we wanted such a king, but rather that the king himself wanted to be of this kind. The kind of ruler he wished to be here, he created a God of the same kind upon the throne. That God, in his conception, is bound by no law, no principle, and this shadow too is bound by no law, no principle. Reflect then, what is your reaction to such a ruler?
Human will versus the doctrine of compulsion. My dear ones, the first influence of Magian concepts upon Islam was the doctrine of job, compulsion. The issue of fate was purely a Magian idea. The very first fundamental concept of life in Islam that was affected by non-Quranic thought was this doctrine of compulsion. If we look into history, the earliest factor that diverted the course of Islam from its original track was this doctrine of job, the belief that one may do whatever comes to mind without responsibility. From this very notion, monarchy was established. All the powers that people had attributed to God were handed over to the king. He became the representative of God, acting as his deputy. And how did this happen? It was through the interpretation of man yasha. Wherever this phrase appeared, its meaning was taken to be, he does whatever he pleases, however he pleases. This misinterpretation laid the foundation for compulsion and monarchy. To understand this matter, my dear ones, there is no need to go further. What is required is what the Quran itself instructed in the blessed words of the Prophet, Taqumu lillahi. Before advancing, stand up for a moment, even for a second, stand up. Then what should you do? Tatafakkaru, reflect, think, ponder. Here we encounter yu'ti mulkahu man yasha. Its translation is usually given as he grants his authority to whomever he wills. Stand up and reflect upon the words you have just read. Consider them carefully.
Quranic wisdom behind commander selection. They had asked, why has this commander been appointed over us? The Quran responded with reasoning. Zadahu bastatan fil ilmi wal jism. All the qualities required in a commander were present in him. Allah explained the reason for his selection. It was not arbitrary. It was according to a principle, according to a law. He was chosen because he possessed superior knowledge and physique. The Quran did not say, who are you to ask? We have the right, we have the power, we appoint whomever we wish. Instead, it gave the justification. His qualities made him fit for leadership. This shows that the Quran with every command also provides the wisdom behind it. Allah is indeed all-powerful, but he does not act as a tyrant ruler. He establishes his commands on the basis of law, wisdom and justice. They asked, why has he been appointed as commander? The answer was given, because the commander must possess certain qualities, and he has them. That is why he was appointed. A clear standard, a law, was explained. After this comes, Wallahu yuti mulkahu man yasha. The translation should be, he was appointed because he possesses these qualities, and then Allah grants his authority to man yasha. The usual translation, Allah gives authority to whomever he wills, does not fit here. When Allah has already explained the reason for his appointment, the connection cannot be arbitrary. If it were meant to say, we appoint whomever we wish, who are you to ask, then the explanation of qualities would not have been given. The Quran first establishes the principle, the commander must have knowledge and strength. Then it says, Allah grants authority to man yasha, meaning to the one who meets these criteria. When the two parts are read together, the meaning becomes clear.
Quranic meaning of men yasha'u, without contradiction. My dear ones, I have often explained that the clear translation of men yasha'u, according to Arabic usage, is whoever desires in accordance with this standard. That is, whoever wishes to become a commander and develops the required qualities, he can attain that position. Men yasha'u means the one who wills to reach such a station, who cultivates these attributes within himself, he will become so. Thus, in the Quran, wherever men yasha'u appears, if you translate it this way, the meaning becomes perfectly clear. It refers not to arbitrary choice, but to the one who strives and qualifies. If you still feel unsettled, note that in some places the wording changes.
Sometimes it is tasha'u, sometimes tasha'un. For example, in Surah Al-Imran, verse 26, which is often cited, قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِي الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرُ إِنَّكَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. O Allah, Master of Sovereignty, you grant authority to whomsoever desires and qualifies. You remove authority from whomsoever desires and fails. You honor whomsoever desires. You abase whomsoever desires. In your hand is all good. Surely you have power over everything. This is usually translated as, you give to whomever you will, you take from whomever you will. But the Quran itself clarifies, it is not arbitrary. It is according to law, principle, and qualification. Whoever wills to cultivate the required attributes, Allah grants him authority. Whoever abandons them, authority is taken away. This is the consistent, contradiction-free meaning of men yasha'u.
Look carefully at the structure of these verses. Just before the declaration, قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ 3:26, the Quran states, وَوُفِّيَتْ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ. Every soul will be given in full what it has earned. وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. No one will be wronged in the least. This establishes a clear principle. Reward and authority are based on deeds, and there is no injustice or deficiency in the divine system. If the next verse were to mean that Allah arbitrarily gives authority to whomever He wishes, without regard to deeds or qualities, it would contradict the principle just laid down. The Quran does not present contradictions. Therefore, when it says, تُؤْتِي الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ, the meaning must align with the law of recompense. It refers to those who will, strive, and qualify according to divine standards. Authority is granted to those who cultivate the required attributes, and it is withdrawn from those who abandon them. The flow is coherent. First, Allah affirms that every soul receives exactly according to its deeds. Then He explains that sovereignty, honor, or abasement is distributed according to those deeds and qualities. This shows that divine will operates through justice, principle, and law, not randomness. If the meaning were that Allah arbitrarily gives authority to whomever He wishes, without regard to deeds or qualities, then it would contradict what was stated just before. وَوَفِّيَتْ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ. Every soul will be given in full what it has earned. وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. No one will be wronged in the least. When the Quran establishes that every person receives exactly according to his actions, without injustice or deficiency, then to say immediately afterward that Allah simply raises whomever He pleases, regardless of deeds or attributes, would be incoherent. It would negate the principle of recompense and justice already laid down. Therefore, the correct understanding is that Allah grants authority to men yasha'u, meaning to the one who wills and strives in accordance with divine standards. Sovereignty is not given without reason. It is given to those who cultivate the qualities required for leadership. This maintains the consistency of the Quran, first affirming justice and recompense, then applying that same principle to the granting and removing of authority. Quranic self-explanation. My dear ones, the Quran presents every command along with its wisdom, and it clarifies its meanings within its own framework. The method of understanding the Quran is to see how the Arabic expressions were used at the time of its revelation, and then to observe how the Quran itself explains those terms in other places. This is a fundamental principle. There is no aspect of the Quran that remains without explanation. Each verse finds its commentary in another verse. The Quran is its own mirror, reflecting and clarifying its guidance. Thus, the interpretation of any passage is not left to arbitrary imagination. It is illuminated by the Quran itself, ensuring consistency and coherence throughout. Here we are told that it is not without principle or measure. In Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 105, Allah declares, وَلَقَدْ كَتَبْنَا فِي الزَّبُورِ مِنْ بَعْدِ الذِّكْرِ. We had already written in the Psalms, after the reminder, أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحُونَ, that the earth shall be inherited by my righteous servants. This is the fundamental law. Sovereignty and authority are given to those who possess the qualities of righteousness and capability. The Quran further clarifies this in Surah An-Nur, verse 55. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ.
Allah has promised those among you who believe and do righteous deeds that they will be granted succession and authority. Here, what was called salihun in Surah Al-Anbiya is explained as those who both believe firmly in the eternal values of God and perform deeds that manifest capability and constructive action. Thus, the principle is consistent. Authority is not given arbitrarily. It is granted to those who combine faith in divine values with the practical ability to fulfill the responsibilities of leadership. This is the divine law of succession, rooted in justice, wisdom, and merit.
Quranic law as divine promise. The promise of God refers to his eternal law preserved in the Quran. When he says that authority will be granted, it is not a casual statement, but a binding principle. The Quran declares, La yukhliful mi'ada, 3:9. God never breaks his promise. In other words, his law is immutable and unchanging. What is this promise? It is stated in Surah Al-Nur, لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, 2:45. We shall establish them in authority upon the earth. But this promise is conditional. Authority is granted only to those who have faith in the eternal values of God and who perform righteous deeds. This is consistent with Surah Al-Anbiya, أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحُونَ, 21:105. The earth shall be inherited by my righteous servants. The salihun are those who combine firm belief in divine values with the capability to act constructively. Thus, God's promise is his law. Authority and succession are given to those who meet the criteria of faith and righteous action. It is not arbitrary, but a principle embedded in the eternal order of the Quran. When the Quran says that Allah grants to men yashau, it does not mean arbitrary choice without principle. The Quran itself explains that he gives only to those who possess the required qualities. Thus, the translation, whomever he wills, should not be taken to mean without any standard. Instead, it should be understood as according to the law of divine will, which the Quran has made clear. Every time the Quran uses men yashau or tashau, it also provides elsewhere the law that governs it. There is no instance where Allah declares granting or withholding without explaining the principle behind it. For example, when authority is mentioned, the Quran elsewhere clarifies that it is given to ibadiya salihun, 21:105, or to alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati, 2:45. Therefore, the meaning becomes consistent. Divine will operates through divine law. Whoever cultivates the required attributes, faith, and righteous action receives authority. Whoever lacks them, authority is withdrawn. By bringing together these explanations, the apparent ambiguity disappears, and the Quran's message stands clear and coherent. The Quran cannot truly be translated into another language in its full depth, because its meanings are tied to the original Arabic expressions in context. If one insists on translation, then instead of rendering men yashau as whomever he wills, it should be understood as according to the law of divine will. The word yashau is rooted in mashiat, which means divine will operating through law. Thus, whenever the Quran says that Allah grants authority, power, or honor to men yashau, it must be read in light of the laws he has already explained. For example, in the case of leadership, the law of mashiat is that the person must have knowledge and strength, as in the appointment of Talut. For sovereignty over the earth, the law is that it belongs to ibadiya saluhun, 21:105, those who are righteous and capable. For divine governance, the law is that it is given to those who have faith and perform righteous deeds, as in wa'ada lahu alladhina amanu minkum wa amilu salahati, 24:55. This is what constitutes the qanun-i mashiat, the law of divine will. It is not arbitrary nor contradictory. The Quran itself claims that its divine origin is proven by the fact that it contains no contradictions. Therefore, wherever men yashau or tashau appears, the Quran elsewhere provides the principle and qualities required. By bringing these explanations together, the meaning becomes clear and consistent,
divine will always operates through divine law. Listen carefully. When it is said that Allah gives to whomever He wills, humiliates whomever He wills, honors whomever He wills, or grants sovereignty to whomever He wills, the Quran itself explains the principle behind it. In Surah Al-Anfal, verse 53, it is stated, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَكُ مُغَيِّرًا نِعْمَةً أَنْعَمَهَا عَلَى قَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. This means such changes happen because Allah never alters a blessing He has bestowed upon a people until they themselves change what is within them. لَمْ يَكُ مُغَيِّرًا. Allah never does this arbitrarily. He never withdraws blessings, authority, or prosperity from a nation without reason. These gifts remain with them as long as they preserve the qualities and capabilities that made them deserving. Only when a nation changes itself, losing the attributes that justified its position, does Allah's law of Mashiach operate to remove those blessings. My dear ones, the matter is clear. Divine will is never random. It is always bound to the law of justice and the principle of human responsibility.
Divine attribute and law of guidance. In our tradition, one of the attributes of Allah, al-Mudil, is often translated as the one who misguides, which creates confusion. Wherever you encounter words like yasha'u, tasha'u, or masha'u in the Quran, they should be understood as operating under the Qanun-e-Mashiyat, the law of divine will. And that law is that the condition of a nation reflects the qualities it develops within itself. We frequently hear the phrase, yudillu man yasha'u wa yahdi man yasha'u, commonly translated as, He misguides whomever He wills and guides whomever He wills. From this, al-Mudil is taken to mean misleader and presented as a divine attribute. But the Quran itself clarifies the meaning. In Surah Al-Nahl, verse 93, Allah says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. If Allah had willed, He could have made you one single community, like animals where all goats eat grass and all lions eat meat. He could have made all humans uniformly righteous. It was possible. But the verse continues, وَلَكِنْ يُدِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ, meaning according to the law of divine will, those who choose and cultivate qualities that lead to deviation will end up misguided, and those who strive for qualities of righteousness will be guided. Thus, the Quran does not present Allah as arbitrarily misleading or guiding. Rather, it explains that His Mashiach operates through law. The state of guidance or misguidance depends on the choices, efforts, and inner transformation of individuals and nations. If the meaning of yudillu man yasha'u wa yahdi man yasha'u were taken to mean that Allah arbitrarily misguides or guides, then indeed one could argue that sin, disbelief, or crime would not be the fault of the human being, nor would virtue be his credit. But the Quran does not leave the matter there. In Surah Al-Nahl, verse 93, after stating, وَلَكِنْ يُدِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ, the verse continues, وَلَتُسْأَلُنَّ عَمَّا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ, and you will surely be asked about what you used to do. This addition makes the principle clear. Guidance or misguidance is not imposed without reason. It is the result of human choices and actions. Allah's Mashiach operates through law. Those who cultivate qualities of righteousness are guided, and those who persist in corruption or denial are left astray. But responsibility remains with the human being, because ultimately he will be questioned about his deeds. Thus, the Quran closes the door to fatalism. It does not allow the excuse that since Allah misguides, my sin is not my fault. Instead, it affirms that every person will be held accountable for his own actions, and divine will functions in harmony with human responsibility.
Divine will and human accountability. If one assumes that Allah Himself directly misguides a person without a principle, then the question naturally arises, why punish the human being for a crime that was not his own doing? This would contradict the Quran's repeated emphasis on justice. But the Quran clarifies that misguidance and guidance are not arbitrary acts imposed upon people. In Surah Al-Nahl, verse 93, after stating, وَلَكِنْ يُدِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ, the verse continues, وَلَتُسْأَلُنَّ عَمَّا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ, and you will surely be asked about what you used to do. This makes the matter clear. Guidance or misguidance is tied to human choices and actions, and accountability remains with the individual. The law of Mashiach is that when people cultivate qualities of righteousness, they are guided.
When they persist in corruption or denial, they are left astray. But responsibility does not shift away from them, because ultimately they will be questioned about why they chose the path of error. Thus, the Quran closes the door to the excuse that, since Allah misguides, my sin is not my fault. Instead, it affirms that divine will operates through law, and human beings remain accountable for the paths they adopt.
Result of turning Quran into a puzzle. The consequence of making the teachings of the Quran into riddles has been the humiliation of the Muslim world and the destruction of humanity, a living proof before us. My dear ones, this is the book of God. Aite sai bhale shada kitabcha hove ta namane atmi. These are fragments of thought. If you reflect, this great book, what have Muslims done with it? Not what has been done to the book, but what the nation has done to itself. No one can do anything to the sun. If a man closes his eyes, he only deprives himself of light. The sun does not become dark. This book is being interpreted in such a way that translations say, whomever we will, we misguide, whomever we will, we guide. And then it is written, we will ask you why you did this. Yet no one pauses to think what is being said. The Quran itself explains, yes, the law of Mashiach could have been like that of animals, where all follow one path, all goats eat grass, all lions eat meat. They do not sin, they do not disobey, because they lack the capacity to deviate from the path assigned to them. Such obedience carries no credit. Among them there is no saint, no believer, no prophet. Neither compelled obedience is obedience, nor compelled sin is sin. Allah says we could have made humans like that too, deprived of choice and will, walking one path like sheep, but we did not choose that method for mankind. Instead, humans were given the power of choice and responsibility, so that their obedience and disobedience carry meaning, and their accountability is real.
Human free will and divine law. Man has been given choice and will, and it is this very faculty that he often misuses. The Quran explains, Yudillu man yasha'u wa yahdi man yasha'u, 1693, meaning whoever wishes to walk the right path may do so, and whoever wishes to choose the wrong path may do so. This is clarified further. وَقُولِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ, 829. Say, the truth has come from your Lord. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ, 1829. Whoever wills, let him believe, and whoever wills, let him deny. After granting this freedom, the Quran makes it clear that the choice is yours, but the consequences are not in your control. You may choose whichever path you wish, but you cannot choose to walk the wrong path and still arrive at the right destination. The results of your chosen path will inevitably be faced. It is like the example of students given preparation leave from college. They are told, whoever wishes may attend class. Whoever wishes may stay away. But it is also made clear, those who do not study during this period will fail. In the same way, Allah has granted man freedom of choice, but He has also established the law of consequences. Guidance or misguidance is the outcome of the path chosen, and accountability rests with the human being. Universal operation of divine law. There is no corner of the universe where results do not unfold according to God's law. This is what the Quran declares. You may choose whichever path you wish with your own will and choice, but do not imagine that you can also determine the outcome of that path according to your own desire. The results are always shaped by the Qanun al-Mashiat, the law of divine will. The meaning of man yasha'u becomes clear in this light. When the Quran speaks of guidance, wealth, poverty, honor, or humiliation, it is not arbitrary. It is always tied to the law of Mashiat. For example, people often say, wealth and poverty are in His hands. He makes whomever He wills rich and whomever He wills poor. Then they point to worldly examples. Someone who yesterday was a street vendor, today rides in a Rolls-Royce. But such changes in a corrupt, exploitative system are wrongly attributed to God. The Quran teaches that the rise and fall of individuals and nations is not random. It is the consequence of their choices, their values, and their actions. Divine law governs outcomes everywhere, in nature, in society, and in human destiny. Thus, wealth or poverty, honor or disgrace, guidance or misguidance, all follow the same principle, the law of Mashiat, which is consistent, just, and universal.
Those who acquire wealth through any means often inscribe in bold letters upon their policies, "Hada min fadli Rabbi," this is by the grace of my Lord. The Quran states, "Anna Allaha yabsutu rizqa liman yasha wa yaqdiru," 30:33. The usual translation given is, Allah expands the provision for whomever He wills and restricts it for whomever He wills. This half-translation becomes a convenient proof in their hands, just as quoting only "La taqribu salat," 4:43, do not approach prayer, without the rest of the verse distorts the meaning.
The correct understanding, according to the Quran itself, is that the expansion and restriction of provision occur according to the Qanun-e-Mashiat, the law of divine will. It is not arbitrary. The Quran asks us to inquire, what is God's law of Mashiat in the matter of sustenance? The answer is clear. Rizq ka bast wa kashad khuda ke Qanun-e-Mashiat ke mutabik hota hai. The widening or narrowing of provision is determined by the divine law, which operates on principles of justice, capability, and human conduct. Thus, sustenance is not a random gift or deprivation. It is the outcome of divine law, consistent with the choices, values, and actions of individuals and societies. The Quran makes it clear that sustenance is not distributed arbitrarily. When we ask, what is God's Qanun-e-Mashiat regarding provision, the answer is given directly in the Quran. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. Whoever turns away from my guidance will have a life of hardship. This means that when people neglect the divine principles that ensure productivity, justice, and abundance, their livelihood becomes restricted. The verse continues, وَنَشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى, and on the day of resurrection, such a person will be raised blind. Thus, deprivation in this world due to neglect of divine law leads to deprivation in the hereafter as well. So when the Quran says, "Ana Allaha yabsutu rizqa liman yasha'u wa yaqdiru," the correct understanding is that expansion and restriction of provision occur according to the Qanun-e-Mashiat. And the law of Mashiat is this: whoever disregards the natural and moral laws by which sustenance is produced in abundance will face scarcity. Therefore, the translation of man yasha'u should be understood as according to the law of divine will. When all related verses are read together, the matter becomes clear. Sustenance expands or contracts not by arbitrary decision, but by the immutable law of God, which operates through human conduct and adherence to His principles. Impact of fatalism on Quranic thought. The greatest damage to Quranic thought has come from the doctrine of taqdir, understood as compulsion. The earliest conspiracy against Islam was the introduction of the Magian belief in predestination, that whatever happens is forced by divine will, without human choice. This distorted the fundamental concepts of the Quran. Today, my dear ones, this idea is on every tongue. It is God's will. Everything happens according to His desire. If He had willed otherwise, it would not have happened. Such expressions have become common, and the more one resigns himself to this fatalistic attitude, the more he is considered God-fearing and spiritually elevated. In fact, the one who says in every matter, "This is happening by God's command, we have no role in it," is regarded as a saintly figure, close to the divine presence. This is the same mindset that poets like Hasrat Mohani, 1875 to 1951, captured when he wrote, "Marziye yar ke khilaf na ho, log mere liye dua na karen." Even supplication was avoided, lest it go against God's will. Such fatalism, however, undermines the Quran's emphasis on human choice, responsibility, and accountability, and has been a major cause of decline in the Muslim world. Quranic view on fatalism and shirk. In our tradition, the greatest distortion has been to cover the consequences of human actions under the veil of God's will. This, the Quran declares, is shirk. People say, if Allah had willed, it would not have happened. If He had desired, we would not have committed shirk. But listen to what the Quran itself says. سَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا. Those who associate partners with Allah will say and reply, لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكْنَا. If Allah had willed, we would not have committed shirk. This is the mentality of the polytheists, yet tragically it has become widespread among Muslims today, even considered a sign of piety. The Quran exposes this reasoning as false. It continues, وَلَا آبَاؤُنَا وَلَا حَرَّمْنَا مِنْ شَيْءٍ. Nor would our forefathers have declared anything forbidden.
In other words, they attribute all their choices and wrongdoings to divine will, denying their own responsibility. The Quran responds, كَذَلِكَ كَذَبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Thus did those before them also deny the truth, حَتَّى ذَاقُوا بَأْسَنَا, until they tasted our punishment. The result of this fatalistic mindset is divine retribution, because it strips human beings of accountability and turns their errors into excuses. Therefore, the Quran makes it clear, to attribute the outcomes of our own actions to God's will in order to escape responsibility is not faith, but shirk. True belief recognizes that while divine law governs results, human beings are accountable for the paths they choose.
Quranic rejection of fatalism. No human being has any valid proof for these false doctrines. For centuries, this nation has been trapped in humiliation and decline, and the root cause is the acceptance of one single distorted belief, that whatever is written in destiny must happen, and man can do nothing. The Quran directly challenges this claim. قُلْ هَلْ عِنْدَكُم مِّنْ عِلْمٍ. Say to them, do you have any knowledge, any evidence for what you say? فَتُخْرِجُوهُ لَنَا. Then bring it forth for us. The Quran declares that such people follow nothing but conjecture. إِن تَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ. You follow only guesswork. وَإِنْ أَنْتُمْ إِلَّا تَخْلُصُونَ. You are fabricating without proof. This is the Quran's verdict. Fatalism has no foundation in knowledge. It is only baseless speculation. And the natural result of this false worldview is degradation and misery. The Quran warns that those who hide behind such excuses will inevitably face the consequences of their own choices, and history itself testifies that nations adopting this doctrine of compulsion fall into decline and disgrace. The Quran directly addresses the mindset that hides behind God's will to justify neglect of responsibility. In Surah Yasin, verse 47, it says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ. When it is said to them, spend from what Allah has provided you, قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Those who disbelieve say to the believers, أَنُطْعِمُ مَنْ لَوْ يَشَاءُ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُ. Shall we feed those whom Allah, if He willed, would have fed Himself? This reasoning implies that poverty is God's desire, and therefore helping the poor would be opposing His will. The Quran exposes this as the argument of the disbelievers, not of the faithful. To say that God wants people to remain poor and that helping them is unnecessary is in fact rebellion against divine law. The doctrine of fatalism, when applied to social and economic life, becomes a war against God's justice. It denies human responsibility, discourages compassion, and perpetuates oppression. The Quran makes it clear that sustenance is distributed according to the qanun of Mashiat, and part of that law is that those who have been given provision must share it for the welfare of others. Thus, attributing poverty to God's arbitrary will and refusing to help the needy is not piety, it is disbelief. The Quran unmasks this false excuse and warns that such arguments are a rebellion against divine justice. Divine will and the false doctrine of fatalism. According to the fatalistic view of Taqdir, if God has already written that someone will suffer fever for 3 days, then nothing can change it. In that case, calling a doctor, seeking medicine, or making any effort would be considered interfering with God's decree. And if nothing is done, the fever will end after 3 days anyway, so human effort seems meaningless. But this way of thinking turns human struggle into a war against God. It assumes that trying to remove suffering is resisting divine will. The Quran, however, presents a very different picture. It teaches that God's qanun-e-mashiat operates through causes and effects. Illness comes through natural causes, and healing also comes through natural means, medicine, care, and effort. To ignore these means is not piety, it is negligence. Thus, the idea that, since it is written, we must not act is a distortion. The Quran emphasizes that human beings have been given choice, responsibility, and the ability to act. To cover our responsibility under the veil of God's will is not submission, but a denial of the very law He established. True faith is to recognize that while outcomes are governed by divine law, human beings are commanded to strive, to act, and to use the means provided by God. The Quran exposes the weakness of those arguments that attempt to hide human responsibility behind the veil of God's will. People invent terms and concepts like taqdir and jeb, and then repeat them endlessly without reflection. The Quran describes this in Surah Al-A'raf, verse 71.
Asma'an sammaytumuha antum wa aba'ukum. These are names you and your forefathers have coined, mere words with divine authority. When the poor are neglected, the excuse given is, they are poor because God made them poor. If we try to improve their condition, it would be a war against God's will. But the Quran calls this open misguidance. In Surah Yasin, verse 47, it says, In antum illa fi dalalin mubin. You are only in clear error. Thus, the Quran makes it plain. To attribute poverty, injustice, or suffering to God's arbitrary will and to refuse responsibility for changing conditions is not submission, but rebellion. It is a denial of the divine law of Mashiach, which requires human effort, justice, and compassion. The fatalistic mindset is condemned as misguidance, while the Quran calls believers to action, accountability, and the use of God-given choice.
Human responsibility and the story of Adam and Iblis presents the decisive lesson about responsibility. Both were given a command, and both disobeyed. Adam's response was, Rabbana dhalamna anfusana. Our Lord, we have wronged ourselves. He acknowledged his mistake, accepted responsibility, and sought forgiveness. Because he recognized his own fault, the door of correction and guidance was opened for him. The Quran then assures, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى فَمَن تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Whenever guidance comes from me, whoever follows it will have no fear nor grief. Iblis, however, when asked why he disobeyed, shifted the blame. You misled me. He refused to accept responsibility, attributing his error to God. The Quran declares that such an attitude leads to permanent rejection, because one who denies his own responsibility cannot reform. This is the essence of the lesson. Human beings inevitably make mistakes, but salvation lies in acknowledging them and taking responsibility. Denial and blame shifting, as exemplified by Iblis, closes the door to correction. Thus, the only way to escape misdeeds is to free oneself from false concepts and accept accountability for one's own actions.
Reality of the story of Adam and Iblis and its lesson. Adam and Iblis are not individuals. They represent mindsets. Where you accept responsibility for your mistake, the possibility of reform opens up. Where you begin to look around to shift the blame for your error, and if no human is found to bear it, you even place it upon God, then that is a mindset that can never be corrected. This is Iblis-like thinking. The story of Adam and Iblis is simply this, dear brothers. If you declare yourself a possessor of choice, responsible for your actions, and your gaze lowers in remorse, then your reform begins. This is the right mindset, and the lost paradise becomes attainable again. But if you shift the blame for your slip and error onto others, refusing to accept responsibility, even attributing it to God, then you remain counted among Iblis until eternity. The very meaning of Iblis is deprivation and despair. It is the mindset of hopelessness from reform. The entire issue of taqdir is nothing more than this, whether you accept responsibility for your actions or deny it. If you accept it, you are Adam. If you deny it, you are Iblis.
You cannot ask a king about the wisdom behind his command. My dear ones, this is exactly what the Quran has pointed out. You may recall that in one of my convention addresses, titled perhaps God's Will, I mentioned this at the end. The entire reason is that for 1,000 years, our nation has been trapped in the claws of despotic rulers, kings and emperors. Their style of governance was such that they could do whatever they pleased, whenever they pleased. Orders were issued, and the very meaning of order was that no wisdom or reasoning was to be explained. Why must you do this? That question was not allowed. It was simply the king's will. Whatever he commanded had to be carried out, obeyed, and complied with. The result of this mentality was captured in the saying, Agar shaba roz ra koyat shabastin, कि अगर वो बादशाह दिन को कह दे कि रात है, babayat koft enak maho parveen. If the king declared that day was night, then immediately people would say, Glory be, the moon is shining, the stars are above. This is how the mindset was shaped.
How the faculty of obedience to law is established. So then, If a nation cannot even comprehend obedience and compliance, how can that nation be made to obey the law, and who has the right to enforce such obedience upon it? This is a very important matter, my dear ones. Who truly has the authority to demand obedience to law? God is all-powerful. There is no doubt about that. Yet despite his infinite powers, he himself declared, "Kataba rabbukum ala nafsihi ar-rahmata." Your Lord has prescribed mercy upon himself. In other words, he imposed upon himself a restriction, a self-binding principle, limiting his boundless authority within a framework. And then he said, وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will never find any change in the way of Allah. This means that even God, with his absolute power, chose to govern through law, consistency, and principle, not arbitrary command. This is the foundation upon which the concept of lawful obedience rests. The one who possesses such immense powers that with a single kun the universe comes into existence, he declares that he has imposed a restriction upon himself, and that restriction will never be changed. This is what gives him the right to be God. Despite infinite powers, he bound himself with such a great limitation that he never violates it. My dear ones, in this world, the right to demand obedience belongs only to the one who, as his authority expands, imposes greater restrictions upon himself and never breaks those restrictions.
State of mind of one who obeys the law. This is the ruler who is imbued with the attribute of God. This is true obedience to law, and such obedience is described in the Quran. ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ. They do not feel any discomfort in their hearts regarding what has been decreed. When thirst arises, it is not felt as an imposed command, but as an inner demand. The law is that thirst is quenched by water. How do you obey this law? Do you ever feel burdened that you must drink water? No, rather you are grateful that water is available. Thus, obedience to law is not external compulsion, but the natural demand of the human heart. When a person obeys it, his heart finds peace and satisfaction. Difference between obedience to command and compliance with law. Obedience to command is obedience to despotism, imposed from above. A person obeys under compulsion, willingly or unwillingly, but within his heart, feelings of rebellion continue to grow. The more obedience to command is enforced, the more certain it becomes that one day it will erupt in defiance. Compliance with law, however, fulfills the inner demands of every individual. And let me repeat, just as God has presented a model before us, despite being the possessor of infinite powers, he bound himself to the law he imposed upon himself and never violates it. In the same way, the human system can only remain stable if those with greater powers and authority impose stricter restrictions upon themselves and never break them. This is the principle by which the universe runs with beauty and order, and human life and social existence can also proceed with harmony and discipline. The matter began here, and the conclusion is this. God can change every law, but he does not change the laws he has set for himself. Listen again. He can change them, but he does not. And his commitment to not changing his law is for humanity expressed in the Quran's words. Law as a mercy for humanity. My dear ones, the Quran speaks with remarkable clarity. First, place before yourself the image of obedience to a despotic ruler, arbitrary commands, unchecked authority, no constitution, no rules. Now imagine that after such tyranny, a system arises where even the greatest authority never acts against the law, nor compels others to do so. What a profound mercy this would be. What a shower of divine grace. God has given law and declared, "It is not the case that we grant rule to whomever we please without principle." Rather, he said, وَلَقَدْ كَتَبْنَا فِي الزَّبُورِ مِنْ بَعْدِ الذِّكْرِ أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحُونَ. We have written in the Psalms after the reminder that the earth shall inherit it by my righteous servants. This means there is no injustice, no lawlessness. The right to rule belongs to those who cultivate within themselves the capacity to obey the law
and to ensure its obedience among others. For such a nation, this promise is fulfilled. The Quran continues, إِنَّ فِي هَذَا لَبَلَاغًا لِقَوْمٍ عَابِدِينَ. Indeed, in this is a message for a people who worship. That is, a people who do not choose a life of rebellion, but live under some system of law and order. Thus, the governance of law, not of individuals, is presented by the Quran as an ayah rahmah, a sign of mercy for humanity. The principle that has been declared here is a great announcement for the nation destined to live under some form of governance. A profound truth has been conveyed, لَبَلَاغًا لِقَوْمٍ عَابِدِينَ, a message that penetrates the heart, which we have conveyed. Humanity has moved beyond the stage of purely individual life. Now it has entered the stage of collective, civilizational existence. Every coming day of human life is moving forward toward those immutable principles which nature has already set forth in the Quran. These unchanging laws are the foundation upon which social order, justice, and progress are built, and they remain constant for all of humanity across time. The word abidin here is remarkable. Whenever a nation seeks to establish its system of life according to the constitution and principles of collective existence, the Quran declares, لَبَلَاغًا لِقَوْمٍ عَابِدِينَ, a message that penetrates the heart, which we have conveyed.
وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ 21:107. We have not sent you except as a mercy to all the worlds. The era of tyranny and arbitrary rule has passed. The age of law and constitution has arrived. In this sense, O Messenger, you became a mercy for all humanity. See how this unfolds. The divine message itself becomes mercy for the worlds, and the one who brought this message declared, وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ 6:163. I am the first to submit. He himself obeyed the law before all others, and then ensured that every person obeyed it. Indeed, God's authority is supreme in the heavens, but on earth, the authority of the messenger over his community was no small matter. This is how the Quran presents the transition from arbitrary command to lawful governance as a mercy for mankind. I have just explained the status of the messenger. فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ 4:65. By your Lord, they will never truly believe until they make you the judge in all matters of dispute among them. See the extent of authority given here. And after appointing him as judge, it is said, ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا 4:65. Then they must not feel any discomfort in their hearts against your decisions, and they must submit fully. Observe how vast this authority is. Yet the one who held such authority declared, وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ 6:163. I am the first to submit. He did not merely govern others or compel obedience. He himself was the foremost in obeying the law. And then, through his unparalleled character and conduct, he demonstrated practical examples of this obedience, teaching by both word and deed.
It was a remarkable era. For example, in Medina, there was a slave girl. At that time, slavery still existed, whose individuality and identity did not even count. She was treated like a commodity, sold like an animal, a possessed object. The Rahmat lil Alameen sallallahu alayhi wasallam gave her a new status. That slave girl was Barira. She left her master, and in those days slave women were not considered wives in the household. They were kept for conjugal relations. Barira left and came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. She said to him, Barira has left in anger. Please intercede. This incident shows how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam elevated the dignity of those who had been deprived of individuality, granting them recognition and the right to make choices, something unheard of in the social order of that time.
See how the mentality was changing even while slaves still existed in households. Ultimately, the destination was that no slave would remain, and the door to slavery would be permanently closed for the future. Even in this transitional period, you can observe the transformation of mindsets. Otherwise, no master would ever say about a slave, "Please explain to her." Barira's master said to the Prophet, "Please advise her." While walking, she met the Prophet, who said, "Barida, what is the matter? You left your master in anger." She replied, "Yes." The Prophet said, "No, Barida, it is better that you return." Now consider, in Medina, a slave girl, I use the term only in relation to her social status, was addressed by the Messenger of God Sallallahu, whose name gave her identity as a Muslim. The benefactor so great that he elevated her from the position of a slave to equality. In the capital city, the head of state himself said to her, "Barida, return." This was the Quran's teaching in practice, a message of death to every form of slavery, a transformation of human dignity, and the beginning of a new era where equality replaced servitude. This is the teaching of the Prophet Sallallahu, my dear ones. He demonstrated obedience to law in practice. When that slave girl, Barida, asked, "O Messenger, is this command you are giving according to God's law, or is it only advice?" This was the courage that had been awakened by the Prophet's training. Mindsets were being transformed. If it was a legal command, then submission was absolute, without any discomfort in the heart. But if it was advice, then even the one receiving it had the right to say, "Messenger, I know my circumstances better than you." And she did so. She smiled and went her way, and the Prophet ﷺ also smiled and let her go. Allahu Akbar. This is obedience to law, not obedience to arbitrary command. This was the lesson taught, obedience to law. And the one who taught it declared, "You are one side, but if I myself disobey his law, then remember, I too fear the punishment of the great day, just as you do." This is the essence of obedience to law, a system where even the messenger himself stood under the same law, showing by his example that no one is above it.
Prophet's exemplary model and respect for freedom of opinion. Reflect on this. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ 21:107. The question arises, how does the messenger become a mercy? He becomes a mercy by replacing systems of corruption, lawlessness, and tyranny with a pure system of law. إِنَّ فِي هَذَا لَبَلَاغًا لِقَوْمٍ عَابِدِينَ 21:107. For nations that must live according to a constitution, this contains a profound truth. This truth is the foundation upon which the messenger, peace be upon him, became a mercy for all humanity. Any nation that adopts this path, obedience only to God's eternal, immutable laws, not to the arbitrary command of individuals, will find the messenger, peace be upon him, as a mercy. But where lawlessness returns, those people fall back into the pre-Islamic age of ignorance, and the blessings of mercy move elsewhere. Their fields will never flourish.
My dear ones, today we have reached verse 247 of Surah Al-Baqarah. May God accept that the point I wished to clarify has been explained within the time available. If anything remains incomplete, I always say, whenever you wish, set a time and come to me, and I will try to explain further. The matter is of great importance. Obedience is to God's immutable laws, not to anyone's command. And the one who enforces obedience must first obey the law himself. Only then does he have the right to ask others to obey. Otherwise, he cannot. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ